If I could have one thing change, I wish Trump hadn't been indicted on any of this stuff. I mean, honestly, I think that, from Alvin Bragg on, I've criticized the cases. I think, someone like a Bragg would not have brought that case if it was anyone other than Donald Trump. And so, someone like that's distorting justice, which is bad. But I also think it distorted the primary. And I think it's been that those have kind of been the main issues that have happened.
Because it's helped him, is that what you're saying? And so therefore
it's both that, but then it also is just crowded out, I think, so much other stuff, and it's sucked out a lot of oxygen.
Joining me now are two of MSNBC's best political analysts, former Maryland Congresswoman Donna Edwards and former Florida Congressman David Jolly, who was a member of the Republican Party, but he has left the Republican Party. David, why is Ron DeSantis still in the race?
Exactly, Jonathan. I heard that clip and I thought, okay, we've now reached the excuses stage of his political campaign, which is always the last one before withdrawal, right? It's fascinating to see this. Look, the storyline on Ron DeSantis is this. It's Saturday morning. We can be lighthearted about it, but Republicans jumped into a hot and heavy dating relationship with him. He was the prom king. He was, as Time magazine said, the future. His opening ad said that on the 8th day, God created him, Ron DeSantis. And so they jumped into this heavy dating relationship with him. They thought he was all that. They realized he wasn't, that he was just into himself and not into them, that he was a little boring, that he had lost his moves. He was stale. Republican voters have moved on. And just like a bad boyfriend, Ron DeSantis hasn't realized that. And so he's still in this race. But the storyline is Nikki Haley. Both DeSantis and Haley, Pence, Christie, all of them got into this race with one strategy. Be the person standing should something kneecap Donald Trump. We haven't seen it yet, but there are still dynamics that could change. But the alternative to Trump is no longer Ron DeSantis. He likely comes in third in Iowa. I think that could be the bombshell. And he's got nowhere to go after that. Haley has all the momentum and the big lead over him in New Hampshire. The next state is South Carolina. Ron DeSantis' presidential run is likely over. The question is his political career over as well? Because where does he go after leaving the governorship? Ask Jeb Bush and Mike Huckabee how that went. It doesn't go well.
Yeah, well, in terms of the latter, it turns into some kind of television career. But Donna, can we talk about Nikki Haley? And I would love your perspective on why you think of all the men on that stage, it's a woman who is the one who has the momentum for second place.
Well, first of all, I do think that voters, Republican voters generally think Nikki Haley is a nice person. I don't think they get that impression from some of the other candidates, but also she has been able to at least attack her opponents, say, on a debate stage, even if she hasn't gone after Donald Trump. And so for that slice of voters who are looking for an alternative to Donald Trump, she has been able to rise to the challenge. And frankly, I think that she hasn't gotten as much challenge herself on some issues like abortion. People describe her position on abortion as moderate. It's anything but moderate. And I think in a larger context, should she ever rise to the point where she got a nomination, those ideas would be right in front of voters and they would reject them. But for now, she's really benefited from the DeSantis slide into the mud pit. So I think that she's an alternative, but even as an alternative, she never really quite catches Donald Trump.
Right. Oh, I mean, when you're 56 points ahead, I mean, even Jackie Joyner Kersee couldn't catch up to someone with that big a lead. Can we just talk about Donald Trump and his rhetoric? I think dangerous isn't even strong enough of a description of what he's saying, talking about immigrants, quote unquote, poisoning the blood of our country, calling opponents, quote, vermin. And he says all these things, these un-American, anti-small d Democratic things, and yet his numbers keep climbing. This is a question for both of you, and I'll start with you, David. And it echoes a question that I asked Congressman Clyburn in the last block, and that is, are we saying, have Americans given up on democracy?
I think there is a large section of America that will accept a restriction of liberties and freedoms if they are the political winner, if their political alliances come out on the right side of that. I do think that's the case. And so does that mean we've given up on democracy? I think in some pockets of the country we will. I want to commend you, Jonathan, though, for your read-in on Trump's language, for using the word racist, because I don't think it's been used enough in this moment. We should be cautious using that word, of course. But what Donald Trump has done is engaged in racist rhetoric and racist declarations to suggest that the blood of immigrants of color is poisoning the blood of white America. That is racist. He's paraphrasing Adolf Hitler. We know that. And so he is either speaking from the heart and reflecting racist beliefs that he holds, or Donald Trump is willing to engage in racist rhetoric to build a political coalition for his own fortunes. At times, though, I think we do ourselves a disservice by talking about it strictly in the political lens. He is leading a cultural movement, and in that lens, it is okay then to talk about his followers, because that suggests in the country today there is a large coalition of people that hold true to racist rhetoric, or at least find it unoffensive, and they are willing to elevate someone who believes that. That's the danger of the moment, and it's chilling. It's chilling. I mean, we could shout it from the mountaintops that Donald Trump might be president, and he is shouting racist language, and yet nobody seems to care. And I think in that vein, sure, maybe we're walking away from democracy, but we're walking backwards to a much more dangerous and more chilling chapter in American history. I do worry about that.
Donna.
Yeah, I do think I agree with David, and I think that Donald Trump intentionally has tapped into what has, I think, a thread that has always existed in America, except that now he's captured not just a thread, but a significant part of at least the Republican base. And I don't think this is not a new Donald Trump. Remember, well, the Central Park Five, but when he entered into the presidential campaign in 2015, coming down that escalator, and from that time, he has escalated the rhetoric and been even more direct than he had been earlier. And I think that is a dangerous part, because he is saying it out loud. He is telling us who he is, and he is demonstrating what a threat to democracy is. And I think, going back to these other presidential candidates, none of them is challenging that language. They could use it to go on the attack against Donald Trump, and they have assiduously avoided that because they want that racist base. And I think this is a danger both with these candidates, but especially with Donald Trump.
Here, Donna, and also here to you too, David, for saying something that is truly important. It's one thing that there are people who support the racist rhetoric and the racism behind what Donald Trump is saying, but then there are also the people who don't find it offensive. And those are the folks who I think are even more dangerous. Former Congressman David Jolly, former Congresswoman Donna Edwards, thank you both very much for coming to the Saturday show.